great turnout, so with a great turnout we get a great buzz and conversation and discussion. But I want to introduce Lynne Peyton. My name is Brenda Horgan, firstly one of the professional advisors here at NISC, and very pleased to invite or introduce Lynne Peyton here to you today. We've been delivering a range of lunchtime seminars over a range of issues and information about which is on the website, and one today is focusing around child neglect, and Lynne will explain all the details. She knows it far much better than I, but on the back of a very high profile report in the South, Lynne was asked by the HSC to undertake an audit of cases across a number of areas down south, Wexford and Dublin and Roscommon, I think, and audited a range of cases and looked at practice on an operational and strategic level, really to try and determine some recommendations for improved outcomes for children in terms of neglect. So taking the learning from that very high profile case and the learning from the audits that she carried out of the cases, and probably came to some of the findings that we will be very familiar with all too often, but still very important to think about how that can influence policy and practice. So you're going to give a presentation and then there might be some time for questions and answers, or yes, okay. So over to you then.
Thanks, Brenda. Yeah, is it okay if we run this more like a workshop than me just talking up there? Yeah, everybody's happy to talk and engage? Great. Super. Tell me who's here first of all. Many social workers have. I see. Oh God, thank God, I see a familiar face. Thought I was getting so old that I didn't know anybody anymore. Okay, so most so that was mostly social workers. Who else have we got in the room then? What other disciplines?
Educational psychology.
Educational psychology, brilliant. You work with the Education Library Board? Yeah, great. And what else?
Voluntary sector, we organise dissertation for mental health.
Oh, fantastic, yeah, because mental health is such a huge issue in working with families where neglect, or we're trying to support families where neglect is an issue. Great.
We're social workers but in education welfare.
That's okay, we still love you.
The unit teacher for child protection in the centre, which is a Belfast Education and Library Board referral unit.
Fantastic. Great. Well, it's great to have that spread, and it's great to see that there's people here from the statutory and the voluntary sector as well, because we're all in this together. And family support tends to get very often pushed on to the voluntary sector to help with, and I'm not sure that we always coordinate that work as well as we might. So no pressure today. They're recording this as well, which means I'm restricted. I can only move between there and up to the front row, which is a killer for me because I'd normally be down at the back if anybody doesn't talk to me down there. But it's good to have that opportunity to put it up on the website, and it's kind of a trial run, so we're going to see how that goes. Okay, so one of my favourite, and I think one of the best self-development trainers and coaches in the whole world, a guy called Jim Rohn. If you haven't got his CD, How to Have an Exceptional Life, it's well worth the $9.99. And he says neglect starts like an illness and it ends up like a disease. Now he was talking about when we neglect the little disciplines that we need to do every day to maintain our standards, you know, like writing up your files, or balancing your bank account at the end of the month, or taking a walk around the block so that you get some exercise today, or taking 5 minutes to meditate. And what he says is when you neglect one of those little disciplines, it actually starts to affect all of the rest, and the effect becomes cumulative, and then you don't have the quality of life that you deserve. But you know what, I think that applies to the chronic neglect of children as well. It starts like an illness and it ends up like a disease. And it's so pervasive and it has such an impact on all aspects of children's lives. So what I want to do, I'm also restricted because I've no clicker, I have to go back to this machine every time. So what I want to do is, as Brenda said, I want to share the learning from 100 cases I looked at in the south of Ireland, but I also want to consider that within the body of international research, within our own learning from various events that have happened in Northern Ireland. And to add to my sins, I'm also a lay magistrate in the Family Court and Youth Court in Dungannon and Omagh. So I also see these young people coming at this, if you like, at the end of the continuum when they're coming into the court system. And I want to look at the implications for practitioners, but as Brenda said, whenever I look at any piece of work anywhere, I will never agree to look at a case unless I can look at the whole context within which that case is delivered. And that's the arrangements for supervision, the resources available to staff, the management arrangements, the interagency issues, etc. So I want to look at the implications for everybody here, not just for practitioners. Have we got any managers in the room? Yeah, quite a few. Any planners or commissioners of services? Okay, we'll have to try and get them on another day then. So I want to look at, the big thing is I want to look at what doesn't work, but I want to look at what works, because the learning is all about getting what works. Alrighty. So the background was there were 7 children in a family in Roscommon who'd been known to services for more than 20 years. Everybody was involved with the family. Public health nurses, schools, psychologists, social workers, and the council as well, because they regularly had to fumigate and bring skips to actually clean up the house. Despite the fact that everybody was involved, nobody really knew what the life was like for these children in this family. And case conferences seemed to repeat the same kind of recommendations over and over again, but the bottom line was nothing really changed with the children. And the parents were very hostile, very resistant, and loads of attitude towards the various professionals. And what happened was in 2004, one of the children asked to be brought into care. And when that child came into care, he shared the full horror of what life was like for him and his siblings, and told a tale not just of chronic neglect, but also of sexual abuse and physical abuse. That led then to prosecution of both parents, and both of them were convicted of various offences. Mom was convicted of incest, Dad was convicted of rape, they were both convicted of cruelty, and there was a call for a public inquiry. Social workers in Roscommon were absolutely vilified, because imagine what it's like when you're both living and working in a small rural community, and of course the cry goes up then, you know, how did you not do anything, why did you not know, why did you leave these children in that situation? So the inquiry report made a huge number of recommendations, and one of those recommendations was that there should be a national audit of neglect cases, chronic neglect cases, right across the country. But in order to get that kick-started, they asked me to come in to actually design the methodology for that piece of work, and to create templates that we could use in doing it, and also then to identify best practice models for neglect, for managing neglect. So again, they wanted an audit. I said it has to be a review of practice. So the compromise was it was a review of practice and an audit of management. So that was the language that we compromised on, because, as we said earlier, it was really important. What do we mean by neglect? This is where you get to talk to me. What do we mean by neglect? Anything?
Children's basic needs not being provided for.
Absolutely. Children's basic needs not being provided for. And what do you claim in basic needs, Brenda?
Clothing, warmth, shelter, food.
Absolutely. Food. What else?
Nurturing.
Nurturing? Yeah. What do you mean by nurturing?
Love, support, emotional warmth.
Absolutely. Really important. Sometimes left out. Thank you. What else?
Children are getting to take part in the community, like going to school.
Absolutely. See into their education and ensure they're part of their community. Thank you.
Protection.
Protection from?
From any other source of harm.
Yeah, protection from all sources of harm. Yeah. Okay, great. Thank you. So this is the definition from Children First, which is the equivalent of our cooperating to safeguard. And they say it's an omission of all of those things. And I highlighted in red the two things that sometimes get forgotten about, which is the intellectual stimulation, broader than education, that bit about, you know, engaging, talking to your child from the very earliest day, and the attachment issues and affection. Several of you said warmth and nurturing, but affection is part of that definition of neglect. And of course we know that neglect is not about one-off events, it's about accumulation of events that happen over time. And then the threshold, and I think, and I've said this to the government in the South, I think one of our biggest challenges is the threshold of significant harm is way too high. Why should children have to have their development severely affected before we take action? And this is why we get all confused, both here and throughout Ireland, about when to bring these cases to the attention of the courts or even into the child protection system. So our definition in cooperating to safeguard children, the persistent failure to meet a child's physical, emotional or psychological needs likely to result in significant harm. We need to play a lot on that likely bit, you know, and be real smart about how we pull the information together. And in our definition, we attribute the omissions to the parent or carer, but pretty much it's the same thing, but we don't actually have attachment or affection in our definition. So when we're rewriting Cooperating to Safeguard, that's something to think about. I love Dorada's work, and I know a lot of you in the room will be familiar with her, probably were taught by her. But every single word in her definition of emotional neglect sends a shiver up my spine. Can you all read it? Yeah, you need to read that. But it's just, damages a child's self-esteem, degrades a sense of achievement. Every one of those words, I think, is so powerful. Okay, so just a wee bit about the methodology in the reviews in the South. It was really difficult to get engaged with the workers in Roscommon because they'd been through so much. So when I met with the social work team leaders, I said, okay, let's do this together. They were saying our work isn't all like that one case, and we didn't like how the report was written. I said, okay, so show me the cases where you had positive outcomes. You select cases where you think you did a really good job in managing neglect. So that's where we started. And then I said, now, would it help to have an independent look at those cases in which you're stuck? The cases that you've been working with for a very long time and you don't feel you're getting the outcomes you want for children. Because part of my role wasn't just to provide an intellectual review of these cases, it was also to provide an independent expert opinion in all of the cases. So I worked with the team leaders in every area to try and bring about change and made recommendations. And where that was resisted, I worked with senior management in those areas, so we did actually do something definitively different for these children. So what happened was then, they identified the first batch of cases, and then I went and looked at cases right along the continuum, all the way from cases that were unallocated, like we had that crisis here a few years ago, the bottom drawer that nobody wanted to talk about, with loads of cases that we just couldn't get around to. So I looked at everything from unallocated cases to cases that had initial assessment but they were on a waiting list for more work. And the difficulty, I think, in all of our departments at the moment is, and I'll talk about resources later on, that sometimes even cases that were quite high up the threshold weren't currently allocated to a social worker. So I kind of got them to give me all their caseloads, all their waiting lists, and I selected cases from those. And the big thing was cases of concern to other disciplines. And every time, I had focus groups with all the different disciplines in every area, teachers, psychologists, public health nurses, doctors, and then increasingly with the physios, with speech and language therapists. Because how many neglect cases do you have where there's a speech and language therapist involved? Almost all of them. And as we went along, we realised that there were key people here that we hadn't been included maybe in Roscommon, so we started to include those groups as we went along. And when we met with all of them, I said, if there's a case that's keeping any of you awake at night, you should tell me about it now. And they did. And actually that flushed out some cases that were very concerning. In terms of what we found, family size was variable. Some of these families just had 20% had only one child, about 60% had 3 or fewer children, and there were only 12% that had 6 or more children. And there were 1 or 2 families that had 7 or 8, and there was one family, a traveller family, that had 18 children. And they had been known forever and ever and ever. And the 3-year-old child in that family was described as feral. She was just like a wee animal running around that van, and we had been involved in collection services for more than 27 years. Interestingly enough, more than half the parents were in long-term relationships, and it was different in different areas. So more single parents featured in the sample in Dublin, and more couples actually married or in long-term cohabitational relationships in Roscommon. Waterford was kind of a bit in between. I have this theory that sometimes children are doubly vulnerable if you have 2 parents and one of them is a protective parent, because, and if you think of all of the recent inquiries with mum and mum's boyfriends, etc., where you have 2 people with ill intent towards a child, that child's lot is doubly precarious. Okay, this will be no surprise. Lots of evidence on alcohol abuse, drug misuse, domestic violence, right across the board. But in Dublin it was higher. But overall, in the overall sample, more than half of the families were characterised by parental alcohol abuse, about a quarter drug misuse, domestic violence in almost half the sample. And then, of course, these things don't occur in isolation. And when you get the toxic triangle of domestic violence, alcohol or drug misuse, and mental health, then you have a really volatile situation. So just to review then, I didn't actually collect information about parental mental health for some reason in Roscommon, but it was such a factor in Waterford that I started to be more careful. I didn't set out to actually do a research project, but as it went along I thought, this information is going to be so valuable, I really need to collect it, so that's why it kind of developed more as it went along. And I want to talk to you about the home conditions. How many of you recently have been in a family where the physical conditions were just horrendous? It was absolutely squalid. Anybody? Yeah? You know what? We went into families like that 30 years ago, but is there any real reason why nowadays that there can't be a basic level of hygiene in families? I'm going to take you through a house in the eyes of a social worker, because this is how she wrote her report. And if you write your report like this, tell me you won't be able to get orders when you go to court. So first of all, she went and she knocked the door and she didn't get in. It was a referral by the public health nurse. She was terribly concerned about two very small children. It was only a year between them. Baby was 3 months and the older child was a year and a bit. And she knocked the front door and she didn't get any answer. So like all good social workers, she'd be peeking through the window. She couldn't see through the window. The window was so dirty she couldn't see. And not just dirty, but grimy. It was impossible to see through. And she took a step back on the pavement and she looked at the house and she thought, actually this house looks derelict. I'm not sure there's anybody living here at all. But she banged the door a bit more and she banged it a bit more and eventually somebody opened the door. She went in the house. She walked up the hall and her feet stuck to the carpet. She went into the living room and she said the living room was just complete chaos. The buggy, the pan, 3 days old nappies, clothes, everything, just absolute mess. And like a brilliant social worker, she said, can see the kitchen. And in the kitchen, she said, there wasn't a square inch of space on the countertop. Everything, just chaos. Dirty dishes, dirty cutlery, shopping unpacked, everything, chaos in the kitchen. She said there was blue mould food, and there was food that was so old it was actually stuck and congealed to the worktop. And then she said, can I see the bedrooms and the bathroom? You had to love the social worker, even though the conditions were dreadful. And in the children's bedroom, she said it was just horrific. And there was dog poop on the floor, and the bedclothes were awful. And in the bathroom, are you ready for the bathroom? She said the smell was overwhelming. She had no idea what colour the lino on the floor had started out, but it was manky, brown, grey at this stage. Now there were 2 small children living in those conditions. Okay. So we have to really be ensuring that at least we get the physical conditions right for these children. Even if there was only a small number of children in the families, the sense of chaos predominated so many of these families. Now, not all of them, because I have to say, in some of the sample, there were middle-class families, and the neglect was of a different type. It was more of the emotional neglect, harsh and indifferent kind of parenting. But there was, in more than 50% of the cases, just basic hygiene was an issue. And nutrition, I mean, most of these children only got a decent meal if it was at school or at a playgroup or somewhere else. And family support workers would say, they would be in the house maybe on Tuesday and making a meal, the family meal on Tuesday, and they would say, we weren't sure what those children ate until we came back on Friday. And inadequate supervision was a characteristic of a significant number of families, and by that I meant children outside playing unattended, children who'd wandered off and nobody knew where they were, children who were vulnerable to the people who frequented the home, parties in the house and maybe unsavoury characters coming into the house, and children not being supervised in the presence of those people. So you can see that there were these were complex families, and there were many, many factors which reduced the effectiveness of the parenting capacity. The children had many unmet needs, so did the parents. The parents had many unmet needs as well. And the difficulty was sometimes we so focused on trying to meet the needs of the parents that we lost sight of the children in all of the situation. And therefore, the risks to the children actually became more and more untenable. And we've talked already about the longevity of the concerns in so many of these families. And many of these parents are resistant. Why would parents be resistant to social work involvement?
Past experience.
Past experience, yeah. A lot of these people were in care themselves when they were young people. They might have been young parents and they were recently left care. For some of them that was a good experience and they welcomed the support if they were in a good aftercare programme, but some of them were nervous about social work coming in because of their own past experience. Other reasons why they might be resistant? Afraid, yeah, fear. Many of these parents were, in their view, trying to do their best, but they didn't have the skills, and they're the parents that we can reach out to and effectively engage. They were afraid that their children would get taken off them because they knew they weren't doing a good enough job, but they didn't know where to go. And the trouble is that sometimes they don't meet our threshold to get a service, and then it comes back at us later on because by that time the children have developed some issues or problems. But some parents are just resistant because they're just not good people, and their intent towards their children is neither healthy nor good. In fact, we've seen enough. I mean, you only have to listen to the news for all the horror stories of everybody from celebrities to whatever over the last few months to realise that there are people out there who do have malintent towards children, and some of them are on these caseloads. So some of them are resistant because they don't want us to know what's going on there. And when I say some children were invisible, sometimes you were going into a family because a child had a learning disability, and maybe the OT and the speech therapists were going in for that particular child. But they didn't realise that there were other children in the family who were also in need or at risk. And one of the great things that we did when we were working through this project was we got everybody together and we did training for occupational therapists, for physios, for speech and language therapists about their role. And people started to see that the whole family was their responsibility. They at least had to be the eyes and ears of the system when they were out looking at the need for one child. Some cases were just too hard to handle. And what I mean by that was, well, we can't allocate this case. This is the traveller case. We can't allocate this case because it would need at least 2 or 3 social workers to manage it effectively. So what do? Leave it on the waiting list. And that case, I know, and I see some people smiling, and it's hard to believe, but it happens. And whenever you listen to the social work team leader who was under enormous pressure to allocate cases and who was short-staffed, at some level you could see where she was coming from, but we missed the plot and we were missing the opportunities. Fortunately, in that case, the public health nurse was absolutely amazing. And when she referred it to me as part of the survey, we got our heads round it. And we used the public health nurse's chronology and report as the basis for a court report. We got in the first instance with supervision orders, and it was allocated to 2 workers, and then they started to really make inroads into that family. The impact on children. These children were just miserable. Would you be willing to do a closed eye exercise? Okay. Because if we can't, as social workers, empathise with the plight of these children, and social workers, and voluntary sector workers, and educationalists, and mental health workers, it's really important that we get it. We have to get just how miserable their existence is. So go ahead and close your eyes and take a deep breath. Okay, I want you to imagine you're 6, and you've just woken up. And it's cold and there's no noise in your house, and you're wondering, is Mommy downstairs? Are you going to get any breakfast today? Maybe you'll go down and take a look and see where she is. Maybe you won't, because Uncle Joe stayed last night. You don't really like him. You don't like the smell of his breath. And you don't like the way he touches you sometimes. Well, oh, you hear Mommy up now, so you'll go down. And she says you're going to school today. That's great. Although school wasn't so good yesterday, because you got told off because you didn't have the right books with you. And then there was that wee girl, and she said she didn't want to sit beside you because you were smelling. But still, school's better, isn't it, than staying here? So you're at school, and you wonder, will anybody come to meet you today? Last day you had to walk home on your own. You were a bit afraid crossing that road. Wonder who'll be in the house when you get home today. Don't like some of Mommy's friends. Will you get dinner today? It's 8 o'clock now, and you're getting ready for bed. There's no hot water, so you don't get a bath. So you're going on to bed anyway. Will your door open tonight during the night? Will you sleep tonight? Okay, open your eyes and stand up and shake that off. I really need you to stand up and just shake it off. Shake Okay. Frightening. Frightening. Icky. I started to do that exercise with people because of a session with family support workers who were so concerned that nobody seemed to hear their part of the story when they tried to feed into case conferences and whatnot, because they were unqualified workers possibly, because they felt they were almost as invisible sometimes as the children. When we talked to them, they said, you have no idea what it feels like leaving these children some days and not knowing what's going to happen to you until you get back. So I think we have to try and make sure that we empathise with the plight of these children, because if we can do that and connect with that, then we're going to be more empathetic in our planning and our responses, and we're going to get some of those issues right between, are we focusing on the parents' rights or focusing on the children's rights? Okay, all of the rest of this is self-explanatory. These kids all missed school, missed health appointments, missed their vaccinations, you know, we're behind on various developmental milestones. And of course, if you don't go to school, you don't just miss out on education, you miss out on the companionship of going to school, the social experience of going to school. You don't get connected to all the other things that are going on in your community. And all of that starts to erode their self-worth. And then, of course, as you get older, it gets worse, don't they? These children, up until they're about 7 or 8, you know, we say, oh, those poor children. And then when they get to 9 or 10 and they start acting out, what do? We call them, they're a new range of problem children. And these kids have poor coping strategies for most things. Anger has to go somewhere, so they either turn it outwards into aggression, and then these are the kids that get involved in antisocial behaviour or criminal behaviour, whatever. Or the other place it has to go is inwards, and then we see them because they're referred to CAMS for self-harming. They're also much more vulnerable to all the other risks, like getting involved with drinking and taking drugs at an early age. And of course, their overall prospects for life in general are pretty poor, and these are our parents of the future. How many of you are working with situations where maybe this is the 3rd generation that are known to social services? Okay. You see, all of you came here today for a reason. Now, you didn't expect me to tell you much very new about neglect, because is there anything so far that okay, maybe I'm telling it slightly differently, but basically, don't you know most of this stuff already? So here's my challenge is, if we already know it, what do we need to do differently going forward that actually makes an impact for these children? Because if we talked about Jim Rohn earlier on and those little disciplines and whatnot, if we as sort of 40 people in a room today can commit that we're going to do something extra for children who are chronically neglected, if we can say we're going to go the extra mile, if we can say we're going to empathise a little bit more, the ripple effect from all the people in this room just doing that little bit more will impact on how we practice with these children. So what I found in the Republic of Ireland was there was no doubt about the commitment of staff. There's no doubt about the commitment of staff in the north or anywhere else that you go to look at these cases. And there was a huge range of supports available. The trouble was it was like the postcode lottery, and if you lived in a certain area you were more likely to be able to access things, and if you lived in another area maybe they weren't available. But what they had were a whole range of things. The centre-based activities like Springboard, Bernardo's Family Centres, whatever. They had home-based work, a lot more home-based work I think than we have here. And family support workers did an awesome job about trying to train parents in the in-home situation. They had programme-based and incredible years, and the Family Preservation Service. Anybody familiar with the Boys Town model? Family Preservation Service. It was a great, very, very intensive, a bit like an intensive family support programme that took place within the family home and very much worked at the family's pace and made them the experts about their own family. And then they created groups. There was a brilliant group in Roscommon for children whose parents had mental health challenges. And just it happened to be in a particular caseload that there were a lot of them, so they did a special group to look at that. So there were some really good services. There were also some excellent assessments. They don't have Unigenie, so they used the assessment model from England, and they also used work that Helen Buckley had developed in Trinity, specifically for neglect, which was a really good assessment tool. But not everybody used it, and it wasn't compulsory, so you would get it being used by one social worker on one team but nobody else, or you'd be getting it used in Boyle but not in Carrick and Shannon. So this is where the governance bit comes in. You know, everybody needs to be using the same tool. There was great examples in some cases of effective interdisciplinary working, and there were some fantastic court reports. But the problem was, it was all too variable. The range was, you know, from not good to fantastic. And I saw some brilliant timely interventions. There was one case where young children were reported by a neighbour as being outside late at night unsupervised, and they were rummaging in the bins. And when they checked with the school said, yeah, these children are always hungry, they steal the other children's lunches. And whenever they started then to look at it, people had come from Germany, and their mum was still in Germany, and the dad was with a new partner in the west of Ireland. But when they checked with Germany, they discovered that they got the children's early health records, and they discovered that while they'd been on a high centile and quite big children when they were young, that now they were virtually dwarfs compared to what they were then. So having got that information, within 2 weeks, the children were in care, and plans were in hand to try and see if they could repatriate them to Germany. The children said, hold on, listen to us. We don't want to go to Germany. This home, this foster home that we've been in for 2 weeks, is the nicest place we've ever been. Can we please stay? So those children's future got secured really, really quickly, not least because they were listened to. All the usual issues, you know, recording, lacked on overview, few chronologies. If there's one thing I could say to everybody, please don't do anything. As you go along, develop your chronology, because with neglect you have to build up the picture. And know where the parents came from, because if you're looking to granny or mummy's sister or whatever to help you work with this family, you need to know the social history and the background of the family themselves. Sometimes really, really important reports weren't brought forward onto the current file, and then people forgot about them. One case I looked at had 28 files. They had to get with this massive trolley and a porter to bring it all in. My starting point in nearly every one of these cases was to try and get a sense of what had been the history, because it wasn't clearly evident in so many cases. The best written file that I saw was a new social worker just out of college, and they gave her this file that they'd had forever and said, see if you could do anything with it. And she started with her chronology, and when she did her chronology, it took her about 3 days, and when she got the chronology together, it was clear then that there was clear leverage to say to the parents, look, this can't go on, we need to do something different here. These children are not getting the standards of care that they deserve. And if you don't do X, Y, and Z, and that's the other thing, be very specific what it is you want parents to do, then we're going to have to go to court for a supervision order. And the supervision order was breached very, very quickly, and they got their care order. But it started with somebody pulling it all together. The reports I'm referring to is if there's an educational assessment, if there's an educational psychology report, it doesn't get tired after, 2 years or 3 years. Bring it forward. Okay, it might need updated. If you do a psychological evaluation on the parents, you know, they're older, pretty much that's going to be it. So bring that forward into your current file so you know what you're working with. Sometimes we're asking people to do things that they are not competent cognitively to do. Yeah. Okay, so assessments, very often just no structure to the assessment and limited analysis. And when it came to case management and case planning, again, you know, over-reliance on family support. Family support is, we put in family supports in order to achieve better outcomes for children. So we have to be clear from the outcome, what outcomes do we want to see? We want to see this child going to school every day. We want to see this child putting on weight. How much weight? We want to see this child getting their injections. We want to see evidence that mummy's not leaving them unattended. We want to see evidence that mummy's not drinking anymore. So you have to be clear what you want to see. Now, if none of those things are changed by the fact that you've got family support services in there, then you have to relook at it. Because it's not all to be dependent on the inputs of the workers. So for example, with a family with triplets. Now the first day the family support worker had a key, she let herself in, she went up the stairs and she got mummy up. By day 2 I expect mummy to be meeting her at least at the top of the stairs. By day 3 mummy should be opening the door. By day 4 mummy should have the children up. You know, but when you're 5 weeks down the road and the worker's still coming in the door and shouting up the stairs to get them all up, you know, it's not working. And I have seen cases where and this wasn't down to resources, the resources going into families were incredible. But we were doing all the work, and mommy hadn't shifted. Or daddy either, for that matter. So sometimes then, that interface between family support and child protection isn't clear. And we have to, that's when we keep the focus on the child and we look at what's life like for this child. It becomes much easier to see when you're in the child protection arena as opposed to family support. And over and and over again we saw the seriousness of neglect minimised. Oh, but they still love their mum. Sure, they're always sitting on her knee, and sure, the child clings. We have to distinguish between healthy attachment and dysfunctional attachment. And these children have nowhere else to go, and they're fearful, so of course they're dysfunctionally attached. Children not engaged. There was a beautiful article we did in Childcare and Practice. We published in Childcare and Practice a couple of years ago by a Polish social worker, and she interviewed children after they'd come into care. And it was scary because she said it was brilliant after we come into care. Everybody talked to us. But before we came into care, we had no idea. We had no idea that the social workers didn't know what was going on in her house. And they actually said, how could people be coming into our house and not know what it was like for us? And they said, nobody really talked to us or engaged us or took us out of the house or gave us space to talk while we were still living at home. So we have to work with these children on an individual basis. And our plans, I've said that already, our plans have to be specific. The start again syndrome, what do I mean by that? Well, when do you start again? When do you start again with the kids and the family that you've had a long time? New work. Family move to a new area. New baby, that's a great start again kind of place. Okay, it's really important that we don't start again. We have to see the new information in the light of all the old information, and something has to change. So basically then when we looked at the governance issues, social work team leaders, because they were under pressure, the thresholds for allocating work to social workers was far too high. And a lot of these cases of neglect were sitting on waiting lists. And again, the whole way up the system, child protection, legal intervention, care orders, everything, just the thresholds were too high. Supervision was really rigorously adhered to, but it didn't change anything for children. So supervision didn't encourage the reflective practice that you need in order to say, well look, you know, where were we 3 months ago and where are we now, and if nothing's changed, what are we going to do next? And training in the South had been just absolutely non-available really for the last couple of years prior to this particular piece of work, and now it's fantastic, they're getting loads of opportunities. But we need training in what is our statutory role in neglect. The new handbook in the South, they've got a brilliant child practice handbook, which is really good. You can get your hands on it. Children have done great work in neglect, and there's, if you just Google, there's fantastic resources out there that we can use. Resources, again, I'm not going to dwell on it in the South. It was just a real issue. They had a sense of, when they put an embargo on, it didn't matter what the impact was. So you could have a particular team that was down to one worker. And then there were also inequity across the system that had developed historically that didn't get addressed. And now with their new service too, so the new Child and Family Agency, all of those things are now getting much more rigorously addressed. Auditing and monitoring, I hate that word monitor. I've always hated that word monitor. What are you monitoring? You know, if we monitor inputs, what do we get? We know what was going in. If we monitor and review outcomes, then we get a sense of whether there's been a change for children. And I've seen audits both in the north and the south, and it's all about, was this done, was that done, can you tick all the boxes? The only thing you really need to be looking at was what was the progress for children? What happened to improve their lives? And also, you find in a lot of places there were interagency issues and interdisciplinary agencies, and they just haven't been resolved. You know, we can never get children seen by CAMS. Well, why not? Who's doing something about it? What is going on? How do you address it? So then I said, well, how does that compare with what's happening here? So I reflected on some of the things that had happened in Northern Ireland in the last few years. I was co-opted onto the Child Protection Inspection in 2006. And again, some of the key findings from that are very similar. And we were recommending that there needed to be much greater focus on the child's needs, that the rights to family life were hugely important, and we had to balance that against the risks and the welfare and the best interests of children. I've already talked about the need for contracts with parents, A, being there in the first place, but B, being very specific, and don't overwhelm these parents. You know, don't give them 40 things to do at once, and they need to be short term, so give them wee chunks that they can do and achieve this week. So this week might be about just making sure that there's a dinner on the table every night, or that they do their shopping and getting the child to school, and then add to it. But don't give them 40 things to do all at once, because then they'll be overwhelmed and won't be able to cope. And summaries, you know, again, on the files, every now and again, do a summary, reflect on where you're at, and leave it for somebody else to see as well. Because a very act of writing it down in terms of asking yourself the questions, and simple questions. Okay, where were we 3 months ago? What did we do? Where are we at now? What got better for the children? And if you summarise in that kind of way, you'll very quickly see whether there's been progress or drift. John Devaney and Lisa Bunton and colleagues reviewed, have you all read that report, the CMR report? Okay, so just the highlights in terms of neglect. Neglect was evident in nearly all of those cases. Parental mental health was an issue in most of the cases. And the same kind of findings, that parents didn't seem to understand or empathise with the emotional difficulties and the developmental delays with their children. So again, a lot of focus on the adult difficulties and not so much on the children. And their recommendations were, well, these aren't all recommendations, the first couple are just kind of statements. There was that sense by workers that neglect is difficult to address. I think there's still that powerlessness among practitioners about what do you do to challenge neglect. And the sense that, you know, because in one family our expectations were lower than what they would be in another family of maybe a higher social standing. You know, these kids go into the same world, they have to go to the same schools, they can compete for the same jobs, they're entitled to the same rights. So I suppose that the big thing, and the other big thing, and I find that all through the South as well, that abuse was much more likely to trigger action than neglect. So you could have been worried about a child being chronically neglected for years, but then somebody hit the child, or there was an allegation of sexual abuse, and suddenly the cavalry rides into town, and now you've got a case of conference and whatever. We have to get the insidious long-term chronicity is really every bit as damaging as maybe a smack or a slap or whatever for these kids. And the other thing is don't kid yourself, because Patricia Crittenden says when all the boundaries are gone, as they do with chronic neglect, you're going to find sexual abuse there anyway. Because when all the other boundaries don't exist, then the vulnerability for those children to sexual abuse is very real. Either within the house or from the people who come into the house or outside the house because they don't have the skills to protect themselves. The big thing that John's report said was it's imperative that the child protection system better understands the child's situation. And I've been saying that all along, and it bears repeating, you've got to get into what life is like in that child's situation. And I see exactly the same thing. I don't see much difference in the kids coming, adolescents coming in because the trusts are applying for a care order for them, or the kids that we see that are coming before the youth court for their 4th or 5th or 6th youth conference report. You know, they're all drifting, they've all had disrupted education, they're all kind of no vision for their future, no goals, they're all on the fringe of criminal activity. I mean, they might be coming in because they've stolen some, it was yesterday's cases, you know, stole perfume out of boots or something, but this is the 5th time. But then they'll get into more and more criminal activities, and you know, they're also abusing drugs or alcohol, and they're just belligerent, and they're disengaged, and they're disaffected, and if we don't do something, you know, they're gonna just be the criminals of the future, whatever. And here's the thing, what we can do by the time they come to court at 15 or 16 is very, very limited. Are you familiar with Heckman's graph in terms of investment? That you get the best return for your dollar if you invest in prenatal care, then the early years services, then the primary school kind of period, and you don't get much return for all of the resources we put into adolescence because it's too late. So the big message is that we need to do more earlier. The other really good research at the moment that supports needing to do more earlier is that all that work on the first 1,001 days. Are you familiar with it? Jane Barlow's work, etc. Yeah, you know, a baby's brain is already 25% developed at birth. By 3, it's 75% developed. We need to be getting in at 3, before 3. So that's why Sure Start, all those programs, those early years programs are so important. And the work of Barlow and Tremblant and others, the template, mums, the first relationship, that attachment between mother and infant is the template for all future relationships. Like, how significant is that? We have to be really working with these young, especially these young mums, where they're still able to be influenced. And we worry about children their education and whatnot, but how they turn out in life and their success stories down the road are as influenced by their non-cognitive skills, like their motivation, like their personality, etc., as they are by their education and cognitive skills. So I'm going to just flick through that. You're getting these slides if you want them. Andre's going to email them out to everybody, and I'll stick them up on my website as well, so you can get them from there. But basically, the USA Adverse Childhood Experience study just confirmed a study of 17,000 young people in the, I think it was 18 to 25 age range. They could see that that there were those causal links between early childhood adverse experiences, including neglect, and health issues later on, and a whole range of health issues, including heart problems and liver problems. And 15% of those adults in that study said they'd been emotionally neglected as children, and that was across all social classes. And they defined emotional neglect as growing up in a family where they didn't feel supported and where they didn't feel that they were special or loved. And there was an article in the paper about 3 months ago. 1 in 5 children in poor families have never been told they were loved. Could you imagine going through a whole day when nobody told you that they loved you? I mean, most of us now, your kids might be just said over their shoulder as go out the door, but going out to work and shout, "Love you, Mum, I love you too." Can you imagine what it was like to grow up and never have anybody tell you that they loved you? This is Malapur's work, where she's saying that we start to see, this is building on the, if you don't get them by 3, that when you start to see children by 4 demonstrating aggression. There's actually great research on it now done by the World Health Organization and the Global Anti-Violence Network that is saying aggression is not so much learned as not unlearned, that actually we're born with an element of aggression, but it's those empathetic, caring, nurturing relationships that actually diminishes it, and where you don't get that, then you start to see, and how many of you say, we're seeing children at 4 in playgroup, aren't we, described as being out of control and aggressive. And then it just gets worse as they go on. And then the latest research, what organisation did it, I'm trying to remember, but there's new research on conduct disorders in the 0 to 5 age group, and they're basically saying that children who haven't got that early attachment and start to display, and conduct disorders being, that really aggressive, uncontrollable behaviour where they're not biddable at all, and they don't seem to demonstrate any empathy in their relationship with others, that they're X times more likely to not finish school and 28 more times more likely to end up in jail, etc., etc. I can't remember just that research, but I can put it on. Heckman's research around, he's an economist, and he looks at the impact of investing early. And he said all of the research now confirms that family environments are the major predictors of future outcomes and life outcomes for children. Health outcomes, emotional well-being, mental health, the whole 9 yards. And the converse is true then, the absence of that results in very poor outcomes for children. We have to get this, we have to get this in our planning, and we have to change how we invest our money, etc. So the consequences of that are, it's just imperative that we reduce the consequences of child neglect. And we do that, I think, by coordinating our commitment as practitioners, as managers, as researchers, as service planners, and everybody just does a little bit more in terms of both practice and governance. Well, we look at the most effective interventions in Ireland were, not surprisingly, the ones that were focused on the children's needs. The ones that promoted the mother-child bond. Are any of you familiar with the Marty Mayo approach? In virtually every area in Ireland there would be Marty Mayo therapists within the social work department. It's an amazing video-based technique where you encourage the communication between mothers and children using simple tasks. Like, so for a 4-year-old, it might be making Rice Krispie buns. With a baby, it could be just changing the nappy. And it's doing the minutiae of that communication while you're actually doing those simple tasks. And what happens is the therapist videos where mum is at the very beginning, and then she works with the mum and encourages her and supports her, and then she videos at various stages so mum can see the development as well. And it would just break your heart to see mum with this little baby. And at first the baby's like just no communication whatsoever. And then after 2 or 3 weeks of working consistently with her, baby's laughing back and mommy's laughing at baby, and she's starting to get rewarded in this interaction with her child. Did you want to ask a question?
It just sounds a bit like they put the new interaction guidance, which is some training on here at the moment.
Great.
And it sounds very similar.
And is it just like looking at the minutiae of all of the interaction? Yeah, great. Yeah, yeah.
Kind of building on positive, so kind of nice.
And are you finding that helpful?
Very helpful.
Yeah, great. And I know Marty Mayo as well, and I assume it's something similar, but it's around, this stuff takes time, but if you can save lives by doing it, it's worth it. An evaluated program, so there are lots of non-evaluated programs, and people inventing stuff and finding something in America and wanting to bring it over here. Do you know we have enough really good stuff here ourselves if we just do it well? So some of those parenting programs like Parenting NI and Triple P and Incredible Years, there's great results with those. And don't forget about daddies. You know, if they're there, they need to be engaged. And I think the other thing was really good collation of information from all sources, and then analyse it. You know, what does it mean? What does it tell you? And you need intensive and coordinated support plans so that everybody is working to the same hymn sheet and you're all touching base with each other. Extended family involvement can be brilliant, but it has to be coordinated. So Family Welfare Conference and the South Family Group conferences here have a real role to play. My experience of them is we leave them too long to review them. We need to review at the end. If we started on Monday, we need to review it on Friday. We need to see how we're going in the first week. We need to review it again 2 weeks later. Because what happens, you know, the law of diminishing returns, you all know that one. Here's where you are today at this seminar, and here's you 2 weeks' time. And you're all going out here and you're promising to do this, that, and the other thing. In 2 weeks' time, you know, life's got in the way. Well, it's the same for families. Granny said she's going to go there every day and put the baby to bed. It works for 3 days. And if you don't catch it on day 4 when she doesn't turn up, then the thing, and it sends those other little disciplines, everything starts to unravel. In the South, they were reviewing family welfare conferences 6 months down the road, and it all come apart in the seams after month 2. So, you know, you have to remember, be realistic about what these families can cope with. So that case study I was telling you about, with the little baby and the mom and the Marty Mayo technique, that was horrendous. The 4-year-old wasn't speaking, the 2-year-old wasn't walking, mom was so flat, dad was disengaged, there was difficulties in their relationship. Baby was upstairs in a cot in a different room for a big part of the day. Totally understood. This child, you know, when you looked in her eyes, was just dead. And then just amazing. All 3 children were on the point of coming into care. There had been loads and loads and loads of workers in the house. The Marty Fit Mayo therapist took the time to build a rapport with mom. She got her trust. She got her engaged. She was patient. She took her through this process. And we saved 3 children from coming into care. And the quality of everybody's life, you know, vastly improved. Enough for these children to stay at home, which is what we all want at the end of the day. But we need to pick the families that we're going to be able to save. And not put loads and loads of investment into families that, you know, it doesn't matter what any of us do, we're not going to be able to save them. And those are the children we need out sooner rather than later. And the second one was actually a very interesting case. I'm going to give you examples of what worked really well. In this particular case, 3 children in the back of the car. Mommy was driving after drinking wine, and she was all over the place. And the 10-year-old phoned her cousin and said, could you get your mummy to come and get us because mommy's driving and we're really, really scared. So Auntie then went and picked up the children, brought them home, whole family compound. Dad took mum to the GP to get her admitted to hospital because what does he see as the problem? He sees the problem as mommy, we've got to help mommy, we've got to get her admitted to hospital. So she got admitted to a mental health unit, and then the aunt reported the case to the GP, this was one of those rare cases, this was a GP referral. The GP reported the case to social services, and the social worker went out and met with the dad, and dad said, you're right, enough is enough. The social worker said, you have to see this from the children's point of view. Dad said, right, enough is enough, we will actually now take action. What was really fantastic about this was that the social worker did investigative interviews with all 3 children, even though they were young. And she had interviews with all 3 children, and then she was able to tell Daddy what it was like for these children. In fact, when they had the Family Welfare Conference, they enabled the children to come in and say their piece in the Family Welfare Conference, which was brilliant. And the conference agreed that Mum would remain out of the house until she engaged with an alcohol prevention programme, and she'd made some progress because she'd been in and out before, but now people were saying, we've got the leverage now and we need to see action. She consented. It was great. They dotted all the I's. They got mum's consent to share information, because so many times adult mental health services won't share information, so they got mum's consent. But we were all in this together, and her therapists were going to say how well or otherwise she was doing. Counselling was arranged individually for all 3 children, and they totally needed it. Because here's this family, a middle-class family, but these children have been experiencing being at the receiving end of mum's difficult behaviour, shall we say, for a number of years, and her unpredictability was the kind of key thing for them. And then there was a schedule for supervised access. Why did access need to be supervised?
In case Mummy was drunk when she came.
In case she was drunk when she came, yeah. What another reason why it had to be supervised? In case she tried to influence the children. And she did, because what happened was Mummy wanted home. So she used all the leverage she could get to try and get home. And that would have included, putting the burden of responsibility on the children, and we couldn't allow that. And this social worker was very familiar with all of the research on collusion and resistance, and therefore was very tuned in to what needed to happen. So the key learning points were, I think, for all of us across the board, is we need to be aware of the consequences for these children, and across all disciplines. We need to just put them first, focus all our attention on them, make sure the assessments are about their life, make sure that the plans are outcome orientated, and that the interventions actually bring about results for children. And we need decisive action, and then when things don't work, we absolutely need to say, okay, well, we've tried this, that and the other thing, now we have to do something different. And if we've kept our chronologies, and if we've evidence-based all of our work, and if we've demonstrated how well we've tried and all the different evaluated interventions that we've used, then when it comes to the point of applying for your care order, it really all should be there already. And I have to say to you, the number of times that we've said in court, the district judge has said, why did it take you so long to bring this case to court? Because we're horrified sometimes at just how long and how many times parents have been given another chance. And the court should be as child-centred as you all are. So sometimes, I've lost count of how many times we've said, why did you not bring this case earlier? So, of course, I can only speak for Dungannon and Nova Court, and I know that people tell stories, but sometimes there's a bit of mythology goes on about the court, and actually it's not as hard to get care orders as you make it out to be. The fact that you generally get a care order, I do know there's different places, different courts, but I would say in Dungannon and Oma, the social workers make the decision, because we very, very rarely don't make care orders at the end of the day. And we also think it would be great if people use supervision orders more appropriately and more often. Okay, so what else can we do? I think it's about encouraging that investment in the Sure Starts, in the parenting programs, in the video techniques and whatever, and encouraging it early. It's good investment for money. There's loads of evidence there is. The escalation policy, this has come out in loads and loads of cases. If you're in a discipline other than social work and you're still concerned and you don't think children are getting the help and support they need, then you've got to keep telling up your line and across or whatever, but keep screaming until the children get a service. And one of the things that is being looked at in SBNI at the moment, because of a case that we looked at recently, I chair case management reviews as well, and there's been a number of those where we're concerned that other disciplines' concerns don't get heard. And so it's really important that every agency has an escalation policy. I think the joint protocol is fit for purpose in physical abuse cases. I'm not sure it's fit for purpose in neglect cases, so I think again that's something that needs a good look. And I think then, as I said earlier, test the thresholds in court. And you see, if you're having real problems in Belfast Court, you need to take that somewhere. Take it to the Family Business Committee, get your managers to go in and sit down with the district judge, take it to COAC. We have avenues in the north where we can take our disquiet about cases not being appropriately dealt with in court, whereas in the south the judges are all powerful. I think the other thing is then that basically what we're saying now is we need to be sure, we need to be, when we see those CMR cases and the findings coming out of those, we need to check to what extent are those a window on the whole system. So one of the things in a recent case was we've asked the particular trust to sample their chronic neglect cases and see how well those are being managed. And I think to an extent that needs a level of independence, because I've seen cases where even complex cases have been gone to another level in the organisation and still nothing has changed. Sometimes you just need fresh eyes, and that's why CMRs are a good way of taking a look, but they're always looking backwards. We need something that will look at current cases. And if you are looking at those cases, then of course you have to look at things like adherence to policy and procedures. But the other thing is, were allegations and concerns appropriately followed up? I've seen children with black eyes and somebody said, oh, her bigger sister hit her. Well, what were the circumstances of that, and how old was the bigger sister? You need to work out those kind of things. I think the protocol, as I said already, we need to check, and we've talked for years. I used to chair the joint protocol group, and we've talked for years about evaluating it. We're always tinkering with it. I think we need a really good look at it. So making sure that there's a chronology is available, looking at the holistic assessment of each child's needs. And then the big one is just making sure that somebody has engaged with those children individually, and we know what their views and opinions are. And don't assume, what's great now is with all the Article 4 reports and things, the children's officers are getting really great experience about engaging with quite young children. And I'd like to see that more general in terms of social workers generally. And then just the plan. Plan, review, change if something doesn't happen, and look at your thresholds all the time. So test those thresholds all of the time. And just to finish with, I've also looked at a lot of cases where there's been neglect in foster care, and we seem to have different standards for relative placements, but we also have situations with non-relative carers, and again this was in the South, where social workers some families and foster families can be very effective at keeping social workers at arm's length. We also have to get over that sense of we don't really believe that foster carers would neglect children or abuse children. So, and very often, again, each complaint or concern is treated like an isolated incident, and we haven't got that sense, oh, hold on a wee minute, there was another child said something when they were in this family. So, so again, just to finish off then, because I know some of you need to leave about 10 to 2, what I would like you to do is just take 5 minutes and talk in 2s or 3s, and just, what does this mean for you? What can you do differently? What can you do that would make a difference in terms of the children who are chronically neglected in your caseload, in your area, that you're responsible for supervising, or if you're a governing body?